To go over what's at stake here, this would be South Carolina's first 3-0 start since 2012.
Crazy.
And that's one of those things we talked about last week about Shane Beamer staying perfect in his home openers. And it's one of those things like, oh yeah, when you start thinking about it, like, I guess that does make sense. But that's one of those too. You're like, dang, really? First since 2012 that they would start 3-0?
Welcome onto the sideline, everybody. I'm Matt Dowell, joined alongside Claire Foley for another Game Day preview episode. Today, we're talking about South Carolina and Vanderbilt, the first SEC game of the season for South Carolina. And Claire, I'm very excited about this game because there's a lot of hype for this game. But first, Claire and I think we're both ready for fall because we came both dressed in our sweaters today.
That's right. We're ready for sweater weather.
We saw the temperature hit a 6 in the front, and we were like, okay,
say less.
Fall, it is here, and we are ready to go. But hopefully this Saturday will also be better weather than what we had to deal with on Saturday, because a lot of rain, but the forecast is looking good, which is fantastic. But today we're talking all about South Carolina and Vanderbilt. We're going to discuss and dissect this game, discuss the series history between these two, talk about the Vanderbilt side as well. We have a beat reporter from the Vandy side of this matchup who's going to join us and give us her thoughts on the Commodores and what they're bringing into this matchup. But first, Claire, let's talk about the biggest storylines when it comes to South Carolina. 2-0 on the season, but it's weird because it feels like there's a lot of stress surrounding the Gamecocks. And I have to say, I understand, they're not looking perfect. I don't think any team is after 2 games, and we'll talk about the offensive woes here in a second. But Claire, to be 2-0, and especially 2 games where you won comfortably, and to still feel stressed, I think that's a good place to be in, when you're 2-0 on the season, and, you've won comfortably. And I think that South Carolina is still in a good position because these games have still been comfortable wins.
Yeah, and I think that is a good thing for South Carolina fans. I mean, you start 2-0 and you feel like this team hasn't even started hitting their stride yet. They still have to hit their potential. And that's something that Shane Beamer talked about this week, was that the fans maybe are feeling the stress, feeling the discomfort when it comes to offense, wanting to see a little bit more from them. But he says they don't feel that way. He's like, the narrative going on out there, I'll tell you right now, we're not feeling it inside. So I think that should be a positive for fans. But you also have to remember their first 2 games of the season, particularly last week against South Carolina State, those are weird situations. Yeah. I mean, you open the season in a neutral site, obviously a lot of emotions going into it. First game of the year, a lot of newness with the team to begin with.
And it felt like a bowl game in Atlanta.
Yeah, it did. And so you obviously not trying to make excuses out of it, but there are some variables that have to go into it that do change how a game feels. And then obviously with the weather delay last week, like 9:20, that's a late start. And especially athletes are so routine oriented. You throw 2.5 hours into the mix, that really throws things off, not even just adding on to it. It's late and they're tired.
Yeah.
So I think a lot can be said about maybe this week is a true normalcy to it. It's a night game, so it will be late again, but you're at home, weather looks good, you have 2 games under your belt. Maybe now is when they start to hit their stride, and obviously opening conference play, they really need to.
Yeah, and I kind of felt the same way because even us here, we were kind of talking, even today, we feel like this is our first true normal week just as reporters. Our rhythm has been weird with Atlanta, with the weather delay. We went to bed really late on Saturday night. So it has felt like a weird and just different start to the season. So I kind of feel like this week is the true real, normal week for us.
And even for South Carolina, you have to remember, I talked about how routine oriented they are. They started the season with a Sunday game, so that throws their whole prep week off, and then they go into a shortened week to go from a Sunday game to a Saturday game. So now is their first full week. They're okay, a Tuesday is a Tuesday, a Wednesday is a Wednesday. They had a full week, full 7 days in between games. We're really not, because the game went into the early hours of Sunday morning. And it's not just something we're seeing with South Carolina. I mean, we talked about last week how I'm covering Clemson football too, and they've had some of those weird things too, where they came up close with LSU and got the win last week against Troy, but it just hasn't felt right. And you can't really put your finger on it.
Yeah.
But something just isn't starting how you would have expected it to.
The rhythm's been weird to start the season, so we'll see what they look like this season. With all that being said, it doesn't take away from the fact that the offense has not looked great these first 2 weeks, and that is definitely the biggest concern for South Carolina. A lot of it starts with the offensive line, and what I like to do as a journalist is I really like to base what I say and my opinions on what I see, obviously, but also what the team is telling us, because they are the ones out there performing and playing. And so we did get to speak to a lot of the offensive linemen this week, and they are aware of the issues. Again, a lot of them are new. They're a new-ish unit together, so they're still trying to find their rhythm, and they're aware of, it's not like, I feel like sometimes we think that the team is not aware of their deficiencies and their weaknesses. They are aware, and I do think that South Carolina's offense is gonna be better on Saturday. I do think, and I think they have to be. I think they have to protect Lenore's better, but obviously it starts with that O-line. It starts with the run game, and I think that they're aware of the issues. And I don't think it's like, they think that they're fine and they're playing great. They're like, no, it has not been good enough. And so I do expect them to be better, but that is definitely the glaring weakness for South Carolina going into Saturday's game against a team that's ready to go. They want to play South Carolina. They're good.
It's good. And they definitely have to establish the run game to be able to compete with Vandy. And I told you before, I have some notes here. And I think the biggest thing people are going to do is compare, especially because Lenore Sellers had such a good freshman campaign. You're going to compare the numbers between how he was last year. And just looking at the rushing side of things, last year he was averaging about 52 yards a game. Wait, where am I? 56, excuse me. Lost my notes. 56 yards a game compared to the first 2 games this year, only 24. So that's cutting it in half. So
big difference.
And that was something he was really known for, shine for, because he had those big moments where he was using those legs. So you don't see that in the first 2 weeks. That's going to be a red flag to fans. Not necessarily a red flag to the team and what they're expecting and what they're looking for out of their quarterback. But when fans have this vision in their head of what Lenore Sellers is capable of, and you're not seeing what's in your head and what you remember from last year, you're going to be like, oh, something's wrong. It just might not be a part of their game plan in the first couple weeks. But I do definitely think that it is something need to establish against Vanderbilt, because if you look at their game against them last year, South Carolina won 28-7, and the big star of the game was Rocket Sanders, and he rushed 15 times for 126 yards. So you see that the recipe specifically against Vandy is the run game. And that's something that they're going to do as well. They have a really dynamic quarterback. So to be able to compete, you need to be able to do both.
Absolutely. And I think also the other thing that was concerning Saturday as well, because I think that was the game we thought, okay, we're going to see some big offensive plays, yada, 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 is that there were a lot of penalties on offense, a lot of false starts, a lot of things going wrong. And so it was outside of the run, and the offensive line, it was also just a sloppy game from them, kind of an undisciplined game. And I think that they're just going to have to be tighter on Saturday. And like you said, with this matchup in particular, the run game is going to be huge. So is Faison going to get more touches? Because we haven't seen him a ton so far early on this season. Is he going to get more action? How's Oscar Attaway going to do? And, we should say, too, at the time of our filming, we don't know the injury report for South Carolina, and I know that's been something Shane Beamer has been talking about. That gets released on Wednesday nights, so unfortunately, we don't have that in front of us, so we don't know how that's going to impact this game, and that will be huge to see, who's healthy for South Carolina going into this game.
The other big note that I took away looking at the stats from both teams, particularly for South Carolina, what's been concerning to me is third down conversions. They're only 7 for 24 on converting on third down compared to Vandy. They're 11 for 16. So that's an area they already have the edge on you on. You have to be able to create opportunities for yourself and take advantage of every opportunity you have, and that's where the run game might come in. If you're third and short, That's when you really need the run game to come ready to go.
Yeah. With all that being said, South Carolina is 2-0 on the season. I know that's just been the big focus. Special teams looks good. The defense has looked pretty good, so we do need to shout out the positives. I do think the defensive line of South Carolina versus the O-line of Vanderbilt is going to be a really interesting matchup come Saturday. But because the offense has been the big discussion, that was a big discussion in the press room this week with Shane Beamer. And here's what he had to say about his perspective on the offense and fixing it ahead of Saturday's game.
Yeah, it's just going back to work. I mean, every game, it's you learn from it. There's good, there's bad. There's things we need to correct. There's things that we need to coach better. There's things that schematically probably weren't great ideas in that game, whatever it may be. You always look at the previous game and then how we can improve and be better. And it's no different. There's whatever y'all are feeling right now and whatever the narrative is on the outside, it's not that in here, guys. Our guys are confident and know how close we are, and it hasn't been good enough. I'm not saying that at all, and we have to coach better. We have to play better, not just the offensive line, the receivers, the running backs, the tight ends, the offensive line, the quarterback, everyone. We all have to play better, starting with me. But, it's offensive football. And 10 guys can do everything right, and one guy can be a little bit off, and it's a 2-yard gain. Every article or TV hit that y'all do, it ain't going to be perfect, and there's going to be mistakes that are made. And our guys have made some mistakes, and that's why we coach, is to correct it and get better and keep improving. And we know we need to be a lot better this week, because this is certainly the best defense we've played all season. And if we're inconsistent and we're getting beat more often than not, it's going to be a long night. But at the same time, we also know we're close, and we finished fourth in the SEC in rushing last year. And everybody, it'd be easy to say, well, you had Rocket Sanders. Okay, well, we got Rasul Faison and Oscar Attaway and Jawarren Howe and Bradley Dunn and Isaiah Augustave and Matthew Fuller and whoever else as well. And we bring back the quarterback, and we got a lot of new faces, and they're young, and they're going to continue to get better, and we're working really, really hard to be better than what we were as well. But I think sometimes people forget maybe what we did in 2024 running the football, and we're not that far off from doing that again this year too.
So let's take a look at the series history between South Carolina and Vanderbilt football. And Claire, if you're a Gamecock fan, you like this matchup. This has been heavily in favor of South Carolina. Saturday's game will be the 35th meeting all time between South Carolina and Vanderbilt football, and South Carolina leads it 30-4. So it has been a heavily Gamecock, heavy pro-Gamecock win in the series, whatever I'm trying to say there. But anyway, South Carolina's won the majority of these games, and they've won the majority of them recently because, Claire, there's a big winning streak on the line going into Saturday night. South Carolina has won 16 straight against Vanderbilt. That's a long win streak, especially in the SEC. And also, when it comes to games played in Columbia, South Carolina is 14-2 against Vanderbilt. And what's actually interesting, they actually have a better record in Nashville. South Carolina is 16-2 against Vanderbilt when they play at Vandy. So every stat when it comes to this matchup favors South Carolina. But Claire, this is a good Vanderbilt team and one of the best Vanderbilt teams we've seen in a long time. So tell us, what's at stake on Saturday for South Carolina?
Well, I thought what was interesting in listening to both head coaches preview this game is that both of them said that this is the best Vanderbilt team that either of them have coached with. Clark Lee said he went back and looked at the 2021 matchup, and he said he couldn't believe how different the team is. And it's the same thing that Shane Beamer said. So to go over what's at stake here, this would be South Carolina's first 3-0 start since 2012.
Crazy.
And that's one of those things we talked about last week about Shane Beamer staying perfect in his home openers. And it's one of those things that, like, oh yeah, when you start thinking about it, like, I guess that does make sense. But that's one of those too. You're like, dang, really? First since 2012 that they would start 3-0. They're also looking for 9 consecutive regular season wins, 17 straight against Vandy. That's what they're in search of. You mentioned the 30-4 all time. And it would make it back-to-back years that they start 1-0 in SEC after 6 straight seasons of dropping the first SEC game.
Crazy. It's so interesting. That's why I love the what's at stake segment, because so many things that are in that stat line that you really just don't realize.
Yeah.
So it's a big, and when you think about what's to come for South Carolina in the SEC, the big powerhouses are still on the schedule, but also when you look at what's next, just in the next few weeks, they have Missouri and Kentucky, which are very winnable games.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I'll speak for myself. I wasn't really looking at Vanderbilt as a true threat until this past week. And I saw what Vandy's bringing to the table, and I saw how South Carolina's doing, and I thought, okay, of these first 5 games, this feels like the matchup that is going to be the toughest of these first 5 weeks. If they can win this game, I think South Carolina is going to start 5-0 on the season, which would be huge for them.
Yeah, and I think South Carolina has done everything right. I mean, you're being nitpicky.
Yeah, we are.
If you just look at the schedule, I mean, they're 2-0. They've won those 2 games pretty decidedly. But you also have these expectations for South Carolina because last week they were a top 10 team, this week number 11. You have Lenora Sellers in the Heisman conversations. You know that they're capable of maybe winning these games by more, but I think it also there's something to be said about a team doing what they need to do to win. And they found themselves in both games in situations maybe you thought they wouldn't be, whether it was they were down or they were maybe not winning by as much, and they did what they had to do to win the game. And it's also maybe they're not hitting their stride, or maybe they're just not showing all their cards right off the bat, because it is a long season, and they also know, and this is something that Clemson's Dabo Sweeney said yesterday, because they're also opening conference play this weekend, that when it comes to conference play, that's like a playoff game every single week. You put yourself in a much better position when you're able to win as many conference games as possible when it comes to actual postseason than if you let any of them slip away. And so you mentioned, obviously, this is the most important game they've had so far. I think this is when you saw the schedule before the season started, you might not have had this one circled if we're talking about circling games like the players have, but I think this is maybe the biggest surprise. If you said before the season, we're worried about Vandy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was saying that too. We were talking before we started, rolling on this episode, is I don't think anyone had South Carolina Vanderbilt as, one of the tension games and all the hype. Let me tell y'all, here in Columbia, this game has a lot of hype. Yeah. There's a lot of tension. There's some bulletin board material going back and forth between the two teams, and it's fun. It's going to be a night game. Vanderbilt has such a personality in their quarterback, Diego Pavia. Mm-hmm. South Carolina obviously has one of the biggest names in college football right now. And I will say this, I think great players and the big names come to play on the biggest stages. And I expect Diego Pavia to show up on Saturday night, but I also expect Lenora Sellers to show up. I think we're going to see Lenore's best game of the season so far. I think he's going to be in that true leadership role on Saturday night, because I think he's going to have to be, because I think that place is going to be jumping. I think Vanderbilt's going to be ready to go, and I think Lenore's is going to be the guy to set the tone for South Carolina and really get this offense going. I expect Lenore's to have a great game on Saturday night. I expect him to really step it up and really lead this team on Saturday, because I think he's going to have to, because I think it's going to be, I'm expecting a dogfight on Saturday, and I think Lenore's has to be that guy to really take this team by the horns and really lead them on Saturday. And I expect him to do that because Lenore's is a great player. He's a great person. And I expect him to step up when the lights are brightest. And this will be the brightest the lights have been so far this season. I know they played in Atlanta, and that was a really fun game, and that was in an NFL stadium. Yeah. But this one feels a bit different, and I expect Lenore's to step up on Saturday.
For sure. SEC play is just a whole different animal, and with that comes, you have to think about, everybody talks about the environment, and that's something that South Carolina had. They have the fans as their 12th man, but you also have to remember that SEC teams are used to that. And a lot of them, they thrive off the competition. And so that's something Shane Beamer was asked about. You say that Lenora Sellers is a different guy when the lights come on. I'm sure there are a lot of people on Vanderbilt's team that are the exact same way, their quarterback included. And so I'm excited for this game. I think, like you said, it's going to be like a playoff-like atmosphere. And I think it's going to come down to the wire. We talk about fourth quarter Lenoris. I think it's going to be a fight to the finish.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Again, a big win streak is on the line for South Carolina. They've won 16 in a row against Vandy. Think about where you were 16 years ago.
What year was it? 2009?
2008? Something. I was in high school.
I was.
Yeah. I was like, let's not age ourselves here, okay? Anyway, but the streak is on the line. But Shane Beamer impressed this week, saying they're really not thinking about the streak. They're simply looking forward ahead to Saturday night.
I don't know if anybody knows. I don't talk about it. Don't think about it. I didn't bring it up with the team. I don't know if they know. It's this year has nothing to do with those previous years. I haven't been around here for every year that we've played Vanderbilt, but I'd be hard-pressed to believe there's a better Vanderbilt team that we've played during that streak than the one we're getting ready to play on Saturday night. They're good guys. They're really good. They're going to be a handle for a challenge for a lot of teams this year.
Well, every week here on our podcast for our game day preview episodes, we're going to invite a beat writer, an analyst from the opposition of South Carolina to give us the perspective on South Carolina's opponent and what they're bringing to this matchup against the Gamecocks. And this week, I spoke with Aria Gerson from the Tennessean, who's a beat writer for Vanderbilt football. She's covered them for many years. And I spoke with her about what Vanderbilt is bringing this season, what observations she's had of the Commodores, and her thoughts on Saturday's game between South Carolina and Vanderbilt. I'm here with Aria Gerson from the Tennessean, giving us the Vanderbilt perspective of Saturday's matchup. First of all, Aria, thank you so much for joining our show. Thank you for joining our podcast. I'm really excited to pick your brain on the Commodores, and just really excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So before we get into it all, I'd like to give our listeners, every week we have someone from the opposition of South Carolina on our podcast. And I want the viewers and listeners to kind of get to know you and your background and how you kind of got to where you are in your career. So how long have you covered Vanderbilt? How long have you been with the Tennessean?
Yeah, this is my 5th season covering Vanderbilt. I have been at the Tennessean since May 2021.
Wow. So, okay. So you have covered them for a good bit. You've been through the trenches with the Commodores and you know them well, which is really, really exciting. So Vanderbilt's off to a great start this season, 2-0 on the year. We all saw what they did against Virginia Tech this past weekend. What has stood out to you with Vanderbilt through these first 2 games?
The biggest thing that stood out to me is how much improved Vanderbilt's run game looks from last year. So in the game against Virginia Tech, they topped the number of rushing yards that they had in any of the games in 2024, including the game where they played an FCS team. So it just looks like the run game, last year, a lot of times it was just Pavia having to run the ball himself. And I think this year, even though the personnel, as far as running backs go, has pretty much stayed the same, they did have a lot of turnover on the offensive line. And that could be helping their run game to find a new level that it didn't last year.
This is a game where we do have 2 very intriguing quarterbacks and 2 very popular quarterbacks. I know for us, Lenoris is such a superstar. In Nashville, Diego Pavia has to be just such a fun player to cover, first of all, but he also seems to be such a big leader for this Vanderbilt team. How important is his leadership to Vanderbilt, and what have you seen from him growth-wise, even from last season?
Yeah, Pavia is definitely the one who sets the mentality in the locker room. He's the one who goes out and talks about, we want to win national championships. And that's not just something that he says, like he does believe that they are capable of winning national championships. And so it's kind of that winning mindset that he's instilled in the locker room that's been the biggest thing. And as far as what he's changed from last year, I think the biggest thing that he's talked about, and obviously it will take a few more weeks before we really know how well it's gone, but he's tried to focus more on recovery to try to prevent injuries, because last year he was playing hurt for about half the season, and that hampered his production. And so he's been trying more recovery techniques to try to stay healthier in 2025.
There are so many matchups within the matchups when it comes to football, so many things that we kind of look at to dissect. When it comes to Saturday, Vanderbilt versus South Carolina, what's the matchup within the matchup that you're really looking at and looking forward to?
The biggest one for me is going to be Vanderbilt's offensive line versus South Carolina's defensive line. Because as I mentioned, the run game in the first two games looked so much better than last year. The offensive line looked like it was improved, but neither of the teams that they've played so far are really the same level as South Carolina. Defensive line wise, they don't have NFL prospects the way that Dylan Stewart is. And that's such a big part of Vanderbilt's game because they do run a run first offense. And because Pavia needs space to be able to use his legs as well. It's not just about, being in the pocket. And so Vanderbilt's offensive line needs to be able to hold off South Carolina's defensive line in order for them to have success offensively.
Shane Beamer has really been very complimentary of Vanderbilt this week, especially, in press conference. We just talked to him for Talking Tuesday, and he has said this is the best Vanderbilt team that he thinks he has faced in his time at South Carolina. You've been with Vanderbilt about the same time as Shane Beamer has been with South Carolina. Is this the best Vanderbilt team that you have covered? I know it's early in the season, but just from what you're seeing, is this the best Vanderbilt team that South Carolina is going to have faced in the past few years?
Yes, I do believe this is the best Vanderbilt team that Clark Lee has had. It's a lot of the top personnel returned from last year with Pavia, Eli Sowers, and those types of players. But I think that on defense, the depth has improved from where it was last year. And they've added a couple of playmakers, specifically wide receiver Trey Richardson on offense, who's a D2 transfer. And I think he provides a level on offense that Vanderbilt hasn't really had in the past. So I do think that this team is better than previous Vanderbilt teams that I have covered.
It's fun to have them in the mix in the SEC. For a long time, I think people disregarded Vanderbilt when it came to competition. So it's fun to have them in the mix. And it's really fun to see what Clark Lee is doing over in Nashville. Now, starting with the preseason going into this week, Vanderbilt has really been saying South Carolina specifically is a team that they really want to beat this season. We know the streak is 16 for South Carolina. This week they've been saying how much they want to win this game. Why do you think this game is one in particular that they've had circled on their calendars?
Well, I think that part of it is just the losing streak, but I think also a lot of people at Vanderbilt think that South Carolina has gotten undeserved attention compared to Vanderbilt because a lot of Vanderbilt fans, this is more the fans, not the players that think this, but a lot of fans are like, well, South Carolina played Virginia Tech, Vanderbilt played Virginia Tech, Vanderbilt beat Virginia Tech more than South Carolina did, so Vanderbilt should be ranked ahead of South Carolina. That's what a lot of the fans think. And then they are not necessarily very happy that they think South Carolina has gotten all this attention when their quarterbacks are very similar and, they have this common opponent. And they think that they should deserve all the attention that South Carolina is getting. And they think that they can do the same thing that South Carolina did last year and get themselves into the playoff conversation with a couple of early wins. But they really need to actually beat South Carolina to do that because they also have Alabama, Texas, and LSU on their schedule, two of those three being on the road, and Tennessee as well, also on the road. So there's really not like a realistic path to winning 9+ games if they don't beat South Carolina.
It's really interesting. It's made for kind of a fun showdown going into Saturday because it's fun competitive talk that's going on ahead of this game. So, but it's interesting because it really does feel like, I don't know if South Carolina Vanderbilt's ever one that everyone's kind of got like fans and viewers and lovers of college football have circled on their calendars. But this year feels different. It feels like everyone's really excited for Saturday night. I don't know if you feel that same thing over in Nashville, but we feel it here that there's a lot of excitement for this Saturday.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's harder when it's a road matchup, I think, especially at a place that's a little harder to travel to. But definitely a big game that has a lot of hype around it.
Is there anything else you want to add about Vanderbilt and what you've noticed from the Commodores? I know we have to create storylines where we can have them after 2 games, but is there anything else that stood out about Vanderbilt that you've noticed in these first 2 weeks?
Yeah, one of the things I'm really interested in is actually seeing these two special teams units go against each other because Vanderbilt last year actually had the number one special teams in the country, statistically. And it's too early to tell, if they have replicated that again this year, although they did return their kicker, their punt returner. But also because, South Carolina's punt returner has 3 punt return touchdowns already. So that's like a different level of coverage that Vanderbilt will need to have. I think their special teams coaching staff is really invested in having elite special teams. And it's a part of Vanderbilt's success last year that I think really went overlooked, was how good they were on special teams, because that enabled them to win a lot of close games through, kicking, field position, punt returns, and things like that. So I'm really interested to see how these two special teams units kind of go at it.
It's been a lot of fun, even here, the Vicari Swain train, whatever we're calling it. It's been so fun because I don't know if any of us saw this coming, and it has just been electrifying. So so hopefully we will see some good special teams on Saturday night. Aria, I want to thank you so much for joining our show. I want to thank you for chatting Vanderbilt. I love getting the perspective of the other team, especially from, we call ourselves unbiased journalists. We're just here to lay out the facts, and the fans can do all the talking. We're just here to kind of lay out the storylines. But I really, really appreciate you talking Vanderbilt with us. And what's hopefully going to be a really good game on Saturday. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to thank Aria Gerson for joining our podcast this week and giving us the perspective of Vanderbilt. And she said she's coming to Columbia for the game on Saturday, so she'll get to see Williams-Brice Stadium and be part of this atmosphere here in Columbia on Saturday night. We're going to take a quick timeout here on South Carolina Sideline and give you guys our final thoughts and predictions for Saturday night's game. South Carolina and Vanderbilt kick off at 7:45 on Saturday night at Williams-Brice Stadium. Claire, to me, Saturday night with SC State was so weird because of that weather delay. And the crowd did show up and they stayed, which was fantastic. But this feels kind of like a restart and kind of like, all right, the real home opener. Yeah. I expect Williams-Brice Stadium to be absolutely electric for this game. It's sold out, which is going to be a lot of fun. I expect this one to be fireworks. I'm so pumped. I'm so excited for this game. Claire, give me your final thoughts and predictions on South Carolina Vandy.
I definitely think the atmosphere is going to be there. You talked about before not noise, but the conversation that's been going on about South Carolina and Vandy. The South Carolina fans are informed. So they know that this isn't just going to be a walk in the park, and they also know the part that they play in the game and bringing the atmosphere. Like I said, I do think it's going to be a fight to the finish. I think it's going to be an offensive heavy game, just because we know the potential of both quarterbacks. I really want to see Lenoris Sellers be dynamic in his way to finding the end zone. I think final score 28-24 South Carolina.
Nice. I'm expecting South Carolina to improve. I do have to say too, I think what I've seen from all the online chatter of this game, I think people are kind of underestimating South Carolina. I think maybe the conversation's gotten too negative and too nitpicky a little bit, because they are 2-0 and they've won these games, and I do know that, I think because I want to say this respectfully, the expectations have been so low the past few years that it's exciting to see Vandy be really good and scoring a lot of points. But, the fun thing about this matchup is that they do have a common opponent, and they both have played Virginia Tech, which makes it kind of fun. And we should say Vandy won that game against Virginia Tech 44-20. They scored 34 unanswered points, which really came in the last quarter and a half. They were down 20-10, and then they just...
Virginia Tech didn't score at all in the second half.
And they just went loose, and so Vandy's a good team. But I do think maybe the nation's kind of underestimating South Carolina because of, the offense and what we're seeing. However, I'm also expecting it to be a dogfight. I'm expecting it to be close. I do think South Carolina is going to win. I think Willie B is going to really carry them and get them through this game. I'm picking 30-24, so we actually have very similar predictions, but I'm excited for a good game. I hope it's a good game. I hope it delivers, but I do think South Carolina is going to get the win. I think they're going to come up with the goods. I think Lenoris is going to show up and lead this team. I think Dylan Stewart's going to lead the defense. Who knows? Maybe Vicari Swain's going to score 3 punt return touchdowns in this game. I don't know, but I do think South Carolina is going to get the win. But I do think Diego Pavia is going to have Vandy ready to go. I think Clark Lee's going to have Vandy ready to go. And I think that they're going to want to go into this SEC season showing that they are here and that they're here to stay.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the conversation maybe turning the tide towards Vanderbilt comes in the number of points that are scored.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the disappointment has come for fans in South Carolina. You expected them to come out the first 2 weeks just blowing these teams out of the water, probably especially South Carolina State. And they just did what they had to do to win. Obviously, you come in with a lot of expectations on the offense for South Carolina, and you see other teams across the board that are blowing out their team. I mean, the Florida State game.
Yeah.
What was it? 73
yes.
to 3, 77 to 3, something like that. And even last week, I had predicted that South Carolina wouldn't do something like that against South Carolina State. And so I think for fans, the perspective is you see the high numbers. Oh, they scored 44 against Virginia Tech. They're the better team in comparison. And a win's a win. So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. They're both 2-0. Let's go see who's going to win on Saturday.
Going to be a lot of fun, but those are our predictions. We're both picking South Carolina to win. Again, kickoff, it's at 7:45. It's going to be another late one, but y'all, again, it looks like a good forecast. Yeah, it looks like a good forecast. So hopefully we won't be there, until 3 a.m. or whatever it is. But before we end our show, we want to remind you all to like, subscribe, comment, and follow. Leave your predictions on this game. What do you guys think is going to happen? What are the biggest storylines you're looking forward to? What are your score predictions? Let us all know in the comments, because this is an interactive podcast. We like to know your thoughts. Do you think we're smart and geniuses? Do you think we're stupid and morons? We want to know everything. Let us know. We can take it. We're tough.
Please.
We're tough. But we want to thank you guys always for watching and listening. As always, like, subscribe, comment wherever here on YouTube or wherever you guys listen to your podcast. She's Claire Foley. I'm Matt Dowell. We'll see you next time here on South Carolina Sideline.